Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and in today's video, my intentions was trying to reach the highest Frost DK Frost Strike crit for PvP I can potentially reach. And if you want kind of the fast, quick answer on that, it was around 6.2k, which can be modified a little more, most likely with food, better weapons, or better burst trinkets, because I am in full brutal gear. Which, I mean, if you're in full PvP gear and had access to a couple extra things, you could possibly get that higher. But it's led me down a very interesting road trying to achieve the largest frost strike, and I may have came across something. I don't know if it's overlooked, ignored, or forgot about, but we're gonna go ahead and talk about it in this video anyways, and kind of give you my opinion on it, and we'll see where it goes from here. I'm very interested to see what other people potentially can do with this information, so let's do this. First off, I want to kind of take you guys through this journey with me so you can kind of understand how I arrived at this idea, I guess. So, starting out, the first thing I tried to maximize some Frost DK crits on DK, obviously, is use the weapon Destiny. Now, on hit, increase strength by 200 for 10 seconds. I figured this would actually be an amazing weapon to try and snapshot, which Blizzard probably thought of, which is why it doesn't actually function when it does proc and you switch weapons. You see up there, I'll go ahead and hit one of these weapon swaps and it falls off. But you did notice something, Cinder Glacier didn't fall off. I still have Cinder Glacier, even though I could swap to different weapon sets, and it just completely stays on over time. That'll come back later on in the ideas that we're going to go ahead and do with some of this stuff. Now, so we got to that point. I decided I ain't gonna do that. So what is the other options I have is to use other weapons. So I went and picked up some like budget weapons, some budget fast swords with originally I had Cinder Glacier on both these weapons, and my goal was to start out DPSing on a target with Cinder Glacier, which I'll go ahead and throw on 2 of those weapons, and to generate a Cinder Glacier proc, which then would lead me into my burst, and I'd swap weapons and deal damage, hopefully proccing Fallen Crusader, which would lead you to a much higher damage percentage. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, I looked at this spec and I was like, or the way I was doing this, and I was like, this isn't going to work, because it actually changes your overall playstyle so much that if you tried to do this, you would miss out on so much damage from having Eraser Ice, and obviously, you know, not having Fallen Crusader on the target on a very original basis. The other thing I had to think about was what were the downsides of weapon swapping, and so what happens is you incur a 1-second global cooldown on swapping weapons, which obviously will affect your overall DPS and the damage you do. But something also interesting I found out, well, I kind of understood previously, was Blood Presence is the best single target DPS spec in the game for elongated rotation. Therefore, something you can do with weapon swapping I found interesting is you could hit a target, right? And the moment you hit the target, you weapon swap, and it's going to use the same global cooldown as the previous ability you used to weapon swap without incurring that global cooldown, maybe 0.1 second if you're capable of doing this at a very quick speed, as you saw with the macro I just used. Boom, instantly went on, and honestly I wouldn't even notice the difference between the two things. Now you might start seeing where we're going with this video, right? So before we split off into something completely different, I'll go ahead and kind of show you the numbers and let you guys know kind of what I came up with. So I think the biggest Howling Blast crit I got was around 4.8k, which is a pretty big Howling Blast crit. And of course I spread dots on the other targets, laid out a big Howling Blast, and it was I mean, that's massive. That's if it's a boosted character, your Howling Blast is literally going to AoE one-shot those boosted characters, which is pretty wild to think about. And if it's a fully geared character, I mean, that's still going to do a, you know, a third to maybe a little bit more than a third of their health pool, which is pretty massive. Secondly, Frost Strike damage. How much Frost Strike damage did I actually get up to? And that was 6.2k, which is a very large Frost Strike. And I was using Blood Presence at the time in a little bit different spec than I'm using now to achieve that damage. But overall, if you were to lay 2 of those out, which would be around 12k damage, and then you'd get a 5k afterwards, I mean, it's potentially 17k damage in 3 seconds. So in a CC window, you could definitely kill a fully geared Death Knight that only has 13k health from you see looking at my character right now. So I did find that very interesting to find that out, that there is some insane potential for stacking on damage if you do it correctly. Weapon swapping on a Frost DK, but obviously there's a big problem. is the consistency, like I just talked about. If you try to rely on Cinder Glacier without using Fallen Crusader and Razor Ice, it doesn't do nearly as much damage on your character. It actually feels kind of terrible, and if let's say you're fighting DPS versus DPS, it doesn't fundamentally work in a fight like that. So then I started testing some other things out, just kind of exploring the idea of weapon swapping a little more, because back in these times when I played a warrior, and of course I had my warrior from earlier in Classic, you know, weapon swapping was a very normal thing for me to do. You know, changing to shields, you know, just swapping out certain weapons for, like, you know, later on we get some weapon chains. Those are pretty nice. But anyways, so swapping weapons was fairly normal for me. So I decided to kind of test a few more things out. So my idea and what I was aiming for is I wanted to come up with a kind of a build / way of playing a weapon swapping without actually, my rule was I did not want to change my current rotation. I didn't want to basically switch that up at all. I wanted that to be completely the same, and I didn't want to lose any damage if I were to try and swap weapons and do something crazy with it. That was kind of my rules of the situation. So I came up with this idea, right? So Fallen Crusader, Razor Ice, you're probably wondering why I have a sword on there as an orc. Yeah, no, you've probably been wondering that for a while, actually. So the reason we have that is because of the names. For name's sake, we need it for the macro swapping, which, I mean, could affect overall DPS in raid scenarios. I could imagine a little bit. So you'd probably want to find some kind of good axe to potentially replace that with as an orc, but that's completely up to you. So let's go ahead and talk about some of this stuff over here. So Fallen Crusader, Razor Ice. One of the things I said, I did not want to change up how I did my rotation. I did not want to change up the rotation, because if you're doing PvE content and you basically had to do anything different, any little thing like waiting for procs, things like that, obviously it would hurt your DPS, and it kind of depletes the purpose of trying to generate this high amount of burst in PvE if you weapon swapped during the incorrect time. The other thing obviously is we are going to want to weapon swap if we're using Unholy Presence. Now if we were like DPSing on a boss or something, we'd be using Blood Presence, and you can pretty much weapon swap whenever you want without actually incurring any kind of debuff. But right now my pure goal is PvP. Now obviously in PvP I'm going to be rocking a Holy Presence to deal the largest amount of burst pressure in a very short window because of the 0.5 global cooldown as I can. That was, you know, it's kind of the main goal of PvP. So we got Fallen Crusader, we got Razor Ice. The one thing I realized about this is I can go in on a target, right? And we're just going to hit this target. Now, in PvP, as you know from the guide video we were talking about the other day, that we are looking to maximize runic power on a target, gain just an absolute ton of runic power, and try to dump the runic power on the target within a burst to go ahead and deal maximum damage. Now, the one thing I wanted to do with this spec, obviously, Frost Vulnerability is 20 seconds. Fallen Crusader is going to proc, and I believe it lasts for 15 seconds. And that is going to be when we want to swap our weapons. Now, my other rule is, if this was like a PvE scenario with this build, you would be waiting for Fallen Crusader to burst anyways. So I realized at that point, if you were to swap after those procs, and hopefully when you have some slight amount of downtime, that's going to be when you'd swap to these weapons. And that's going to be double Cinder Glacier. Now, you have about a 15-second burst window during your cooldowns to do that. Now, obviously, you're going to be popping Unbreakable Armor, and if you're using Death Chill to guarantee a crit, you're going to be popping that at a time. I did find out, if you have a Killing Machine proc, and you pop Death Chill, both of them add up. Now, if you use a single Frost attack, it doesn't consume both. It only consumes one. So you can double stack those for a little extra burst. You saw Cinder Glacier double procking there. Oh my gosh, Cinder Glacier proc, you're beautiful. Why do you keep procking? It's like the unicorn to double Cinder Glacier proc. I don't know what's up with that. Anyways, back into this conversation. It was kind of the idea I was going for, and then I realized that this has turned from something that I don't know why we haven't used it in the past. I'm kind of confused about it, and obviously if used in the correct way and at the right time, could amplify your damage by quite a bit, especially when it comes to single target DPS and Blood Presence, since it doesn't actually incur this global cooldown wrath that you have. But PvP, you'll notice it a little bit more swapping over because you do have the 0.5 second global cooldowns. But If you do that during a time where you're rune starved, you have a lot of runic power, and you're planning on dumping on somebody, it would be the perfect time to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and swap back here. Go ahead and swap those around. And go ahead and just kind of open up on the target. Now I am going to kind of like aim to get my Fallen Crusader buff. Come on, Fallen Crusader, where you at? Now, as you can see, you can play the spec completely normal right now. There's nothing stopping you. Fallen Crusader procced on the 2 Cinder Glaciers, and this is where you're going to start your DPS. This was where I kind of had the idea of you would burst no matter what at this point. Like, you would not play any differently. Your full aim is to proc Cinder Glaciers with these weapons with Fallen Crusader up, but if it doesn't happen, I really wanted nothing to be the negative side of what we were hitting. And that's kind of the idea I came to, and kind of the conclusion I came to is, why aren't I doing this? Why wouldn't I want free extra damage with very to no little reasoning not to be doing this? So you'd literally burst during this, and you'd hit the target as hard as you can with these weapons. Now, the only thing you wouldn't be getting is like, what, 7, 8 damage from a Razor Ice proc, and if it doesn't actually proc, you swap back to your weapons, and it's almost like nothing happened. I procced up my Fallen Crusader again, I switched back to my Cinder Glacier weapons, and I'm back in on the target trying to proc extra damage. Now, Cinder Glacier procs, what can we do? We can throw up our guaranteed crit and hit with an extremely powerful Frost Strike on the target. Then once it falls off, switch back. Now, this is a bit more complicated, and it is going to kind of like turn up the skill cap of the style that you're playing, but overall, since it procs 2 attacks from Cinder Glacier, you're getting 20% damage. That's adding well over 1,000 damage on each of those Frost Strikes when you're in endgame gear, and you're doing this correctly. And I kind of tried to come up with a term for this, and what seemed right is Fallen Crusader juggling. I have no idea. We'll work on that. We'll work on a name later for it. I don't know what you'd call it, but yeah, so I went out and tested this a little bit, right? I tested it on people, I tested it on some healers. So DPS versus DPS, I wouldn't necessarily rely on this. Now, you could use it if the other DPS was geared and good and could survive long enough for you to do this, potentially. But overall, I don't have a lot of DPS targets in terms of DPS versus DPS that survive long enough for me to even do this to. Maybe to a Prot Warrior, potentially, Prot Pally. I could see that happening, but mainly in like healer versus DPS scenarios, and potentially raid. But I don't know how weapon swapping currently works in raid combat. I know that it sometimes worked different ways over time, and being that it also, it worked in Shadowlands and a few other places, but I would have to test that out in raid to find out, and I'm hoping some other people can test it out. Maybe run some numbers, because I guarantee there probably isn't a simulator out there right now that somebody has written up to factor in some weird proc RNG stuff like this. But, I mean, I have gotten procs on Cinder Glacier 3 times in a row during a burst, which I actually do have footage of it, which blew my mind to see it, because that's kind of literally the unicorn of Cinder Glacier procage, which I'll probably put on the screen if I remember by the end of editing this video. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you liked this topic. Go ahead and let me know down below. I mean, obviously, the first thing people are going to say 100%, and I guarantee some people are going to do it even without watching the end of this video. They're going to be like, man, now I got to buy 4 weapons to do this. This is some garbage. Blizzard, why am I doing this and need so many weapons to proc this? And no, I understand. I get it. It's kind of an insane concept. I get that. And what it takes to pull this off correctly would be insane. But you're also talking about the people that would want to min-max or produce something higher than the normal. So it kind of, comes with the territory, I'd assume. But obviously you can play Frost DK just fine without it. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below. I would like to see some people testing stuff out and doing some stuff with this. If anyone wanted to record like a video or clip of them doing that. And see if we can do anything crazy, maybe on raids. But until next time, guys, leave a like. This was your boy Hazzed.